Federal Reserve is made up of a bunch of unelected bankers. They determine the country's monetary policy and hold the future of this country right in their hands. Now, people across the country are calling for transparency in the Fed. A lot of people are saying, why don't we abolish the Fed? Ron Paul's bill to audit the Fed now has almost 300 co-sponsors. If everybody saw the video of Democratic Congressman Alan Grayson grilling the Fed chair, Ben Bernanke, it might be even more than 75%. Watch this.
Table on page 26, which consists of your balance sheet. And one of the entries on the balance sheet is under assets, central bank liquidity swaps, which shows an increase from the end of 2007 from $24 billion to $553 billion in change at the end of 2008. What's that?
Those are swaps that were done with foreign central banks. Many foreign banks are short dollars. And so they come into our markets looking for dollars and drive up interest rates and create volatility in our markets.
So who got the money?
To financial institutions in Europe and other countries.
Which ones?
I don't know.
$500 billion and you don't know who got the money?
The loans go to the central banks, and they then put them out to their institutions to try to bring down short-term interest rates in dollar markets around the world.
Well, let's start with which central banks got the money.
There are 14 of them, which are listed I'm sure they're listed in here somewhere.
All right. So who actually made that decision to hand out $1 trillion that way? $500 billion. Who made that decision?
The Federal Open Market Committee.
Anything specific about it?
Do you know my counsel says Section 14 of the Federal Reserve Act.
All right. We actually looked at one of the arrangements, and one of the arrangements is $9 billion for New Zealand. That works out to $3,000 for every single person who lives in New Zealand. Seriously, wouldn't it have been better to extend that kind of credit to Americans rather than New Zealanders?
It's not costing Americans anything.
Wouldn't it necessarily affect the credit markets if you extend $500 billion in credit to anybody?
We are lending to all U.S. financial institutions in exactly the same way.
Well, look at the next page. The very next page has the U.S. dollar nominal exchange rate, which shows a 20% increase in the U.S. dollar nominal exchange rate at exactly the same time that you were handing out $500 billion to foreigners. Do you think that's a coincidence?
Yes.
All right. Well, the Constitution says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law.
This money is not drawn from the Treasury.
Well, let's talk about that. Do you think it's consistent with the spirit of that provision in the Constitution for a group like the FMOC to hand out $500 billion to foreigners without any action by this Congress?
Congress approved it in the Federal Reserve Act.
When was that?
Quite a long time ago. I don't know the exact date.
100 years ago?
The original act is 1914, I believe.
1913.
I don't know whether this provision was in 1914 or not, but the Federal Reserve Act was in 1913.
All right, and at that time, the entire gross national product of this country was well under $500 billion, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Is it safe to say that nobody in 1913 contemplated that your small little group of people would decide to hand out $500 billion to foreigners?
This particular authority has been used numerous times over the years.
Okay.
Well,
stop.
actually, according to the chart...
Stop. I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. You got to be kidding me. Did you answer any of those questions the way he did? Well, he's smarter than you. John Tamney is here. He's the editor of Real Clear Markets. John, help me out on this. We're just asking for just some transparency. Just want to look at your books. $9 trillion seems to be an awful lot that you're just like, I don't know what happened to it. H.R. 1207, almost 300 sponsors now. 75% of Americans support it. Who's standing in the way for this coming to the floor?
Well, I think the first answer to that is obviously Barney Frank really likes Ben Bernanke. For good or bad, I think bad, he likes him. Secondly, when you think about those 300 sponsors, I think there's some...
Wait. Are you saying that it's being held up because Barney Frank likes him? Like, hey, pal, how you doing? I'm going to do you solid. Or he likes the Federal Reserve?
He likes the Federal Reserve and he likes Ben Bernanke. But I think when you look at the 300 sponsors, I think that there's some politics going on there. A lot of them will co-sponsor the bill. But they don't want this kind of power because they like this right now. The Federal Reserve invariably makes mistakes that we discuss a lot that cause recessions. But now they can grandstand. They can say, okay, the Federal Reserve caused it, and we are going to bring you before Congress. We're going to grandstand in front of the media and bash the Bernanke Fed. The last thing they want, which is them vacating their constitutional role, which is to coin money and regulate the value thereof. They don't want this kind of power. I think a lot of them don't because they
I don't want them to have the power either. Let the market work it out. I mean, again, if we were teaching actual history, you would see the Depression of 1920 that nobody's ever heard of. Why? Because it lasted a year. Why? Because nobody did anything. It just collapsed and rebuilt. That's the way it works. In fact, that theory is, I believe, Kondratiev. It's a Kondratiev wave. The guy who was the chief economist for Stalin, and he said, hey, you know what? We should just let things collapse and rebuild like the capitalists do, and then Stalin shot him in the head. End of story. Thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. I can't take it anymore. Thank God it's Friday, America. Thank God it is Friday.